elections in and of themselves are not the solution. In Zimbabwe, what we have seen is a situation where a coup took place in 2017 that really resulted in Emmerson Mnangagwa being put into place as a civilian figurehead and the military taking over ZANU-PF. So as a result of this, without ensuring that the military and the security services return back to their role, the military go back to barracks, do not involve themselves in the affairs of civilian, political and socio-economic life, unless these conditions and reforms occur, even security sector reforms that ensure that you have a non-partisan military that does not act in the interest of any particular political party, it is highly improbable at this stage that you will have free and fair elections. You know, in Zimbabwe, we've seen an erosion of the rule of law, and this has been replaced by rule by law. And what is interesting is that ZANU-PF has effectively used legislative instruments like the PVO bill that limits civil society operations and the space, democratic space in Zimbabwe to allow really for people to associate and express themselves effectively. The Patriotic Act that now restricts really the ability of citizens to express themselves. Sometimes it is said that the most patriotic thing that you can do is to express dissent. This is being criminalized in Zimbabwe, where those who disagree or express opposite views can now face prosecution and possible imprisonment. Previously, we have the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act that limits people's access to information, limits people's ability to express their views.
No voices, foreign or local, inclusive of rogue NGOs, should sow seeds of division and disharmony among us.
Yet again, we're going towards another general election in Zimbabwe, which, for all intents and purposes, bears all the hallmarks of what has happened in the past. But to make it worse, there are deep concerns about the preparedness of the opposition, that is the CCC, which is seen as the main contender, Nelson Chamisa, because of aspects related to their inability to organize and the restrictive environment that exists in Zimbabwe. But in particular, there have been questions around the democratic credentials of Nelson Chamisa himself. Some of the people, the leaders in his party, complain that there are opaque leadership structures in the CCC, and that the organizational capacity to actually engage in effective campaigns did not occur in time for these elections. Similarly, when you look at people like Xavier Kasukwere,
the reasonable man in the street,
a breakaway element from ZANU-PF, restrictions on his ability to actually contest these elections have meant that he would not have had time to campaign on the ground. And many others also cite the fact that rural areas, for example, are no-go areas for many opposition parties because they're unable to campaign and mobilize in rural areas. And if you look at the demographics of Zimbabwe, the majority of people in Zimbabwe live in the rural areas. So an ability to control and dominate rural areas means that you are most likely to win an election. So that in and of itself makes this election very difficult for opposition. Technical issues around the elections, which should guarantee an equal playing field, that should ensure that that will of the people is expressed. These things are not in place. For example, the voters' roll. It's not clear whether this voters' roll is verified, and that in actual fact that it is a true and authentic representation of the people who are eligible to vote. The process of registration has been cumbersome for those who would have wanted to vote in Zimbabwe. And as a result, you could argue that you could see a generated outcome. But also when we look at other technical aspects of the election, which is around where polling stations are going to be, whether there'll be enough monitors and agents of the political parties who will operate freely to ensure that the counting and the returns from these polling stations are actually credible. These things are still not in place in Zimbabwe. Instead of having elections, that we possibly see a transition and a transitional period where these reforms are allowed to occur, and then ultimately at a later stage have elections that will be more credible. It's what we're calling on the regional body who are going to observe this, SADC in particular, is really to call it out where there are these irregularities, but to have a more robust approach to the monitoring and observation of these elections, to at least ensure that some semblance of regularity is restored to the electoral ground, as unlikely as that might be at this stage.